and I'll officially welcome you. If you're new to this space, my name is Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo. I'm the director of the Deed Research Lab at Parsons School of Design, and delighted to be hosting La Hora with Valentina Palacios Velásquez, who is an alumna from the Parsons MS in Strategic Design and Management, and is working with the lab as a design researcher. We welcome all of you to this space. It's a space of learning, a space of sharing. I was delighted to hear from some of you in the past few weeks that you were eager to have conversations or get feedback, ask questions about particular work that you're exploring. And that is precisely the point of these spaces, especially when we don't have a special guest. We do a round. I'll go around and call on each of you and ask if you brought a thing to today's La Hora. And your thing could be a particular question, a resource you want to share, a project in progress on which you want feedback, or perhaps you didn't bring a thing and you want to listen and learn with others and participate in the conversation. Don't feel pressure to turn on your camera. It's nice to see the faces, but I also understand that sometimes that's not possible. And you can also participate via the chat, via text. So we'll start our round. As we go around now, keep your comments really brief, just maybe less than a minute. Tell us if you brought a particular thing, and then I'll facilitate. I'll call on you when it's your turn to expand on the thing that you brought that you wanted to talk about in today's La Hora. Sound good? Great. Okay, so Valentina, did you bring a thing today?
I did bring a thing today. So in the past month or so, we have been discussing about like what is the role of consumers in the artisan market. And a lot of times when people talk about sustainability, they kind of blame the big corporations and they say that like consumers or individuals don't have a role to play. We are starting to discuss that actually that's no longer the case, because consumers are the ones that are moving the decisions that are happening in the business. So I just wanted to kind of like see what is the opinion of the people here in terms of what is the role of consumers in the artisan sector.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ananya, you have a thing?
Yes. Just to introduce myself, I'm Ananya. I'm in strategic design and management in Parsons, and I'm a senior right now. So I'm working on my capstone. And my capstone's about extrapolated art forms and giving a platform to artisans and local craftsmen to be able to showcase, share knowledge, really be able to have a platform for their artwork around the world or in urban areas. And while I was talking to my professor, they told me about the La Hora initiative and Deed Labs in general, and I found this whole space that's doing exactly what I want to be doing. So I just joined today to learn more about the initiative and the work that's being done. I want to meet everybody that wants to be a part of it, and maybe if there's time, I'll share where my project is at, but it's really not much at this point. But yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Welcome. So glad that you found this space. Deborah, do you have a thing? Perhaps you can't hear me or can't unmute, so I'm going to keep going. And Deborah, feel free to write in the chat if you want to
Sorry,
participate.
I forgot to unmute.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't have a thing. I was just curious to see what this was and listen in. As background, I have a Bachelor of Architecture and I'm a graphic designer now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for being here. Listeners are absolutely welcome. Camila, do you have a thing?
I have a thing. I have actually many questions. So yeah, I'm also a senior on MSSDM, and I'm starting my capstone. And since this is the problem, the period for research, I don't want to come up with a solution or with an idea right now. Well, of course, not a solution, but like something like a project. I'm just in the phase of research, and I started with the question of identity. What are we, and how our identity is like how our body, if you think it like very abstractly, is like a sum of many pieces, and those pieces are shaped by the women that surround us, not only our ancestors but also our friends and many feminine figures that we have behind us, or besides. And after this I wanted to sorry, to tackle costureros, which is this practice that is, so I'm from Colombia, and costureros happen in Colombia, and it's like a construction of time and space of women who are normally grandmas or like people above their 60s many times, and they just sit together and knit and create crafts and things that are mostly for other people, like they are always thought and made for someone else. So now I'm starting to dig on what's the meaning of what you are doing for something, for someone else, and at which point you become what you are doing, like the thing itself. It's part of you, but you're part of the thing as well, and how that's also transgenerational. So since now it got a shape, and I want to bridge this with agency, like these women agency, because as far as I've talked to them, and I also have another case study in Denmark. It's like a costurero but with a different craft, and I've talked to them, and what they feel is that they lack this agency since they're not part anymore of the productive ecosystem in a way. But I want to get to know more about the ecosystems of care instead. And
I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to pause you
Okay.
there. And when it's your turn, we'll expand further. Yes?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Thanks, Camila. Really beautiful questions there. Jackie, did you bring a thing today?
Yes, I did. I'm about to embark on the beta, isn't it? It's not beta in the beta 1-year run of the training program that I've put together for equipping designers to connect with hand weavers and be able to generate their own custom fabrics as we work together with the hand weavers in Bangladesh. And so I'd like to present what's happening for this beta year, but also ask just questions around accessibility and things like that. That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Exciting to see what you have. Farzana, did you bring a thing?
Yeah, Camilla, I are in the same class. I don't know how I have not met Ananya yet. We are all in the same batch. And it's interesting that, you know, we're in different sections, and how, you know, it can happen that we're working in the same area and yet don't know about each other's work. So this is something maybe we can work on as a program level. So I'm also looking into my capstone research area. I'm looking into alternative fashion activities that are going on parallel to the mainstream fashion system. So I'm looking into the space with the lens of localization, and then the community-based activities, and also what kind of business models can be derived from these activities that are going on. And I'm also looking into the commercialization of artisanal crafts on a global scale. So yeah, I'm still thinking very broadly about it and talking to specialists and professors and trying to bring it to a focus. So yeah, I would like to know everyone's view about the commercialization of crafts, because this has been, one of the key points that we talk about here at Deed. And yeah, basically that. And there are different types of crafts groups around the globe. So whether the business or commercial approach is the right way to go, or if not, then why, and then if yes, how to go about it. I'd like to know about everybody's views. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzana. Tatiana, did you bring a thing? You're muted.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Rocha. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. But I spend many of my professional years as a graphic designer. And it's very interesting to hear all the different approaches and projects in there. I don't have a particular thing, and I feel that I have many ideas in my head, but in general, this week I found myself questioning a lot exactly that, because I think that there's something happening in Colombia right now, or some exhibitions, but a lot of artists have been working with a lot of indigenous communities with their crafts, and it's also I'm trying to see how I word this, but I'm questioning a lot, and I'm questioning myself as one of those persons that has worked with indigenous people throughout my practice and my work, to what point this is something that is fashionable and people are jumping on it because it's a fashion and they need to do, or it's something that is genuine. And especially with artists, when the artist is always upfront and is the one that it continues to speak on behalf of the communities, even if the work is focused around the communities, it continues to be sort of like an extension. And I'm, as I see that as something that is great, that this is being brought to the forefront, I'm also kind of seeing this as a style of extractivism. And that's why I question a lot. And I've been sort of removing myself with wanting to participate in that. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm also being extremely critical of the practice, and that I am going to the opposite way, but to the opposite end. So that's kind of where my head is right now, as I have been immersed in Instagram for the past week and trying to figure out if I'm being extremely critical or where am I coming from. So yeah.
We love being extremely critical. So thank you for being here. It's really hard to remain extremely critical and also not paralyzed in our work and our practice. So we can talk about that further. Anis, did you bring a particular question, or hoping to get something out of today's session that you would like to share with the group?
Hi. So not particularly. I just got to know about this, I think, last night, and I wanted to check out what's going on. So I've just hopped into the call for a few minutes. I have another meeting in about 15 minutes, so I won't be here for long this time around, but I hope to participate later on in the next sessions.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. And finally, Laura, did you bring a thing today? For now, we're just sharing like a brief 30-40 second overview of what you were hoping to get from today's Laura, and then we'll go back and spend a bit more time.
Yeah, hi, my name is Laura, or Laura, whatever. I just pronounce it Laura just because it's easier for everybody, but my name is Laura. I'm currently working on my capstone project, and I'm researching on like Colombian artisans and the possibility of generating jobs for them that include the idea of maybe like exporting their arts and their crafts. I think that it's similar to what Tatiana was mentioning. And I'm exploring also the possibility of including sustainability into that. I'm on my research stage, so I don't know where I'm going with this. We are supposed to create later on next semester like project that involves maybe like creating a brand, a product, a platform. So yeah, right now I'm just researching about like where is this going, if this is good, how can we like actually support artisans in a positive way that empowers them and supports them economically. That's it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Great. So yes, there's quite the Colombian contingency in today's Laura. Really interesting synergies as usual across several of your remarks. Perhaps we can start with this question of commercialization that Farzana is exploring, connects to Valentina's question about the role of consumers in the market, connected to Laura's interest in generating jobs. And then from there, we can jump to Jackie's, share a bit more about this training program, as I think that may be one of the, let's say, quote unquote, solutions as to moving forward. So Farzana, maybe I'll have you start. If you could share, like, what is that particular question? You mentioned commercialization of artisan craft at a global scale. Are you right now focused on a particular question, or are you trying to dig through that to find what the questions may be?
Yeah, actually, I'm at a quite explorative stage at the moment, but I'm looking into this space with the question of, you know, how we talked about like sustainability for culture, and how the question again revolves around, our culture is supposed to be sustained, or it's an ongoing process. And then when it comes to engaging with indigenous craftspeople or craftspeople who are doing the crafts work as a means to maintain livelihood, if the approach could be different, and in that case, what can be the focus of engagement from a designer's perspective? And then I'm looking into strategies later on, hopefully, that, you know, we need to be mindful of so many cultural and community-based things that are innate for that particular community, maybe. And then if we go for the commercialization pathway, then what could be the strategies to mitigate all those problems at a later stage that might come, or, you know, how to work basically in good working symbiosis. So that's what I'm looking into.
Wow, great. So I'll jump in, and I encourage everyone to jump in. If you have resources to share, add links to the chat. You can raise your Zoom hand or your physical hand. So my first reaction, the first thing I want to say is to assert that I have learned from both indigenous communities in Guatemala, as well as this past summer, indigenous communities in the Arctic region of Finland. And last week on campus, there was an event with 2 fifth-generation Navajo weavers to assert that culture is always in flux. And one of the issues that in the lab we have seen with the commerce-driven orientation of designers and entrepreneurs working with artisans is an insistence that they, the artisans, should not change their culture, that they should not change their designs. Last week, the Navajo weavers were sharing how they're teaching the younger generations how to weave in their traditional styles. And they were confronted in a marketplace. One of their nephews has created some imagery that connects to video games and to kind of contemporary living. And in a marketplace, they were critiqued, saying this is not real Navajo weaving. And so it's like, who has the right to claim that culture is changing? I have never woken up stressed out that I'm losing my culture. I have the privilege of passports and visas and multiple languages, and I want to encourage everyone here to not create models that impose that others keep their culture stagnant, because it is a privilege to be able to have a global lifestyle, and as cultures evolve, they too can be part of globalization. The last thing I'll say is there's a romanticization, or there's a romantic perspective that external people to communities bring to the life in the community. Anecdotally, in our first fieldwork program that we did in Guatemala in 2008, the students in this particular town that we were in, San Lucas Toliman, were saying, "Ooh, we don't want San Lucas Toliman to become like Panajachel, which is directly across Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. Panajachel is the #1 tourist destination of Lake Atitlan." And the artisans with whom we were working, their dream is that their town become like Panajachel, because with a tourist destination comes people who bring dollars and euros and will purchase things. And there's a hope for income generation. And we may have access to all the literature about the cultural, how cultural tourism is unsustainable, and, ethical, sustainable tourism, etc. But this is where I defer to the communities themselves to really make those definitions of who they want to become and how quickly they want to evolve. So, yeah. I don't know if others want to add to that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I just started speaking. That the communities themselves are the ones who have the rights to decide for themselves, of course, what they want to maintain and what they don't want to. And if, as a designer, we are thinking about engaging with such communities, then we as designers should not impose our ideas and ideas about new designs that may not be innately original to the community, right?
That's right. And think about ways of working that you can learn about and facilitate, so that you are giving as much information as possible, so that when the community is making a decision, they're making it based on as equal of a knowledge playing field as possible. I have, in my lectures here on campus, for example, had one year a student come up to me and say, "Oh, my brother is doing this project with, it was also with weavers, and I said, "Oh, and does he pay a fair wage?" He said, "Oh, yeah, he pays a fair wage." "How do you know it's fair?" "Because he's paying what the artisans requested." And so the question to us, if we have access to the fair wage calculator, but the community does not, if we know that the centuries of top-down development and charity models are not lifting people out of poverty, should we just sit back and allow somebody to request a wage that we know is not going to lift them out of poverty? Or do we have an ethical responsibility to bring that knowledge with us, and to not just say, "What do you think you should make?" but instead say, "This information shows that for your particular context, this is what would be fair." And when we have done that in the lab, the reaction is, "Wow, we could never make that much money." But you have, those of you that, there are at least three of you here who want to initiate projects, I want to encourage you to feel that ethical responsibility to really bring that with you. So I'll go to Laura, you have your hand up, and then Valentina.
I was just going to say that yesterday I was talking with a person that works at Artesanías de Colombia, and I asked her like, what's the point, like the fine line between designers guiding artisans and then artisans like being part of like the design process and like the putting their essence in the product. And she talked about the idea of like being almost like a conversation, like a dialogue, where they also take part of taking these decisions, because sometimes there's symbols that are like sacred that they cannot use. So it's also about almost coming into like a middle ground between what they think it's like their tradition and their culture, and then like the designer almost like guiding, providing like guidance.
Yes, really great. Wonderful that you're in touch with Artesanías de Colombia. In fact, with Tatiana recently, we were having a conversation about the various initiatives that they have, and happy to chat about that further. So we'll go to Valentina and then Tatiana.
Awesome. So I just wanted to add one thing, and it was that to what Cynthia's point, I think it is very important to empower the communities we are working with the resources and the information, so that they can make the decisions that is best for them. So in this case of like when you are going to get paid, or like what is the expectations of like when the order should be delivered, and like all should be very transparent, and just just like provide the information that they need in terms of what are the standards in the industry, what are the standards in terms of pay, what are the standards or how are you going to even commercialize a product? Are you going to commercialize it internally in a market where a product is going to be sold for this amount of money, versus if you are going to commercialize it in different countries, what is the money that consumers will be paying for that product, and how you expect to change the compensation model if you are. So I think it's just like as more transparent you are, the better will be. And also I wanted to add one point, because it's great that we are thinking about increasing the income perception for artisans, but also in terms of empowering, we know that a lot of the communities we are working with don't necessarily have a financial education, and they don't know how to manage those resources, because oftentimes like if they come from different territories, perhaps like they are more used to like just trading potatoes for tomatoes or something like that, and they are not used to managing cash. So like how are you going to help them to make a change in those lines? So yeah.
Thank you, Valentina. Tatiana?
So as I was hearing everyone, I had a question, and one that was, so I'm trying to kind of envision, like kind of understand more the models that each person is kind of envisioning, and the community. And so because most of the time, let's say last year I did a project with a group of women who make handmade paper, but I came in with a fully executed idea, right? And they brought in their knowledge. In a way, I saw that as what was a collaboration, where I made the paper and made the pieces, but I had a very clear idea. So but this is an art piece that I proposed, and I was coming with all this specific things. And what I'm trying to, like, the question is, like, when you're thinking about these models of coming and working, are you thinking what is that role that you're having if, let's say, you're not, and I'm not like, I'm just thinking, okay, I have the idea, and I normally just have the idea very well executed. And as a designer that has worked with advertising agencies and with many agencies, I like when the client comes with a very well executed idea, because it actually allows me to grow and to really collaborate in a way that gives me room to know what I do, than with somebody comes with like not a clear idea, and it's like, what can you do, and show me, and then the person does something, it's like, oh, I don't like that, and that's not going to work. I had found that that model on my end as a graphic designer and my times of being an illustrator was a horrible. Like every time that a client will come and say you're going to have full on freedom, it was something that I was like, this is going to go really bad. And now I think that I place myself in this position where I come with very clear ideas. So that gives me the room to be able to direct. But what I'm seeing from the projects that I'm hearing, it's a very different model where it's not necessarily somebody's going to come with a line of a design and work with the artisans to execute it, but it's more of how are we going to give room to these artisans to sell their products or have an idea for new products. And that's kind of where I'm wondering how does that work in that sense, you know? And it's like, what is that role, what is one's role in that place, you know, or your role? How do you see yourself in that role? If it's more of an admin, if it ends up being more of an administrator role, or if you are coming and seeing yourself as something that is coming to help, and is that community being asked for that help?
Yeah, great questions. Certainly one of the challenges that we point out in many of the models that we see are that the business model and the way that the organization is set up reduces the artisan to cheap labor and doesn't celebrate them as a creative practitioner. So those of you starting things, really thinking about how are you centering the knowledge and the creativity of the artisan, and how are you leaving your own desires to design to one side? So a designer as facilitator. We've seen, because once you start to imagine increased sales of products, it immediately means that you're going to have to work within the expectations of a global marketplace around quality, around volume, around price point. That what we've observed and documented is that always necessitates changes within the artisan community itself. I interviewed a YU artisan a couple of years ago, and she said, we love working with designers if one, they're committed to a long-term work, not just a one-off project, not just a one-off collection, but really long-term. And second, if they can adapt to our indigenous ways of living and traditions. And she said to me, when designers come imposing their industrialized models, it's as if they're asking us to jump into the void. And it was such a beautiful way to frame it, this imagery of an indigenous person being asked to now function within commerce and capitalism that is so counter to their commitment to continue to live via their indigenous traditions and ways. And one quick example is in the YU community, if somebody dies, there's a mourning period. I think it's 90 days. And what if you're expecting product because your client needs it for, I don't know, the holiday sales period? Are you going to insist that the community break their mourning period to get to work and finish the artisan products? Or how might you imagine models that force us, the consumers, and I want to get to Valentina's question around consumers, to align our expectations with, in fact, more sustainable ways of living, and not the other way around? And I think that is a challenge that I've not seen in the 15 years that I've been working in this space, haven't seen any student explore. Really, what does that model look like? What is it? Is it a business? Is it not? Is it a co-op? Is it not? Like, what is it? Is it even possible? Is it a paradox that we can only talk about theoretically, but not necessarily design and deploy? But Valentina, maybe it's a good moment for you to jump in with your question around the marketing, around consumers.
Yeah, so my question was more what is the role that consumers play today in the artisan sector? If what Cynthia was saying, and we were discussing in another conversation before, there isn't anything more inconvenient than purchasing a product from an artisan. So, like, how do you get that consumer to say, okay, I'm going to purchase something on Etsy instead of Amazon, even though the Etsy product might take 2 months versus the Amazon product will arrive between a couple of hours? How do you also, like, it also like connected to the Tatiana's question of like, is this something that is fashionable? So if the artisans products are trendy on the moment, there is a lot more people that want to consume those products. But what do other people need to do when those products are not so trendy? Like, what are the strategies that we as designers and creators need to have to kind of like push that industry forward? If we also are trying to create like long-term relationships with the communities we are working with and not just one-offs. So I don't really have any answer. I just have like more and more questions on what is the role of consumers, and being a little paralyzed on like just being highly critical about consumers at this point. I'm like just like putting myself like it's also my position. Like I actually consider myself to be a very conscious consumer, but like too conscious that I don't even consume a lot of products. So if I'm even in the stream of being conscious, but I don't even buy anything, like I'm not supporting the artisans. So who is this type of consumer that is actually supporting the artisans?
Excellent. Thank you. I put in the chat last week, I learned about this marketplace called 8th Generation. And the two weavers that were here on campus were saying we've been very hesitant to enter into any kind of partnership that might exploit Navajo culture, Navajo identity. They were telling us how out of the hundreds of books that exist, or maybe thousands of books that exist about Navajo weaving, none have been ever published by a Navajo person. And so they were talking about their commitments. So they're now in a partnership with 8th Generation. And the reason why, it's because it's native run. And therefore, there's this kind of much clearer understanding around culture, around, avoiding exploitation, around fairness of pricing and wages, etc. Tatiana, you want to respond?
So I couldn't stop thinking about West Elm as a brand that has used artisans and there's a few of them. And it struck me, Valentina, what you were saying about, and in terms of consumerism, and also kind of going back to fashion, like exactly that. Like if something is like, and I kept thinking about, I don't know, around Christmas time, I just once started buying these like little guys that were like to hang in the tree, right? And they never did them the same ever again. And you can't find more animals the same. They just did it once, and it's like, and they were perfect. And it really kind of annoyed me. But it made me think about that idea of how these brands just are constantly it's the fast fashion. And even if it's artisans, like it continues to drive that. And also if everyone wants to, it becomes very fashionable, the impact of the demand, how does that get handled? When part of what is amazing about crafts and artisan work is that is not something that happens fast and that it takes time. So how is that like, and I thought about that when I was working with and I'm going to put in the chat the women from the collective in Barichara, because they do these really cute animals made out of ike, which reminded me immediately of the West Elm animals that I had purchased once. But they talked a lot about the issues that they come across when large orders come and they have to meet these deadlines and they don't have enough power to do it. And it's interesting, that idea of that commitment, because I think in that commitment you can build, like, no, this is not something that happens in a year and then next year we don't carry those animals because we're now into the ones made in, I don't know, in wood and other materials. But it's like maybe how the creativity, it's like the process of length to allow to new ideas to come and not to try to exploit just that moment and create something for that moment to like sell. But I was curious about West Elm, and have you done studies about, as West Elm and Citizens Tree, I think it's called, I don't know, but this, and what are the models that they have, and how, like, have you gone into like knowing the ethics, the working ethics of them and that?
Yeah, West Elm has only wanted to talk to us off the record, which gives you a sense of what they would
actually
say.
have something to say about West Elm, and like it happens also with anthropology in the group. But when I had my company, I used to hear in a lot of entrepreneurs alike that they were very worried about selling to like some of these companies, because what they do sometimes is like they purchase from you one time and they try to recreate the same product in China or India, and then they like you are off, like they don't buy from you and like never again. So a lot of people didn't want to like sell them because like they knew like they were going to be copied. So that's probably what happened. Like if they cannot reach the same negotiation with you for the next collection, they don't do it. Or if it is no longer trendy, that again goes back to what is the role of consumers. How can we make the artisan's products like more, I don't know, like a temporal, like it's not a season base, it's more like it's always there and like you always are going to have it. And we don't consume it as one time, but we actually consume it throughout different years. And that maybe can create a change, because if not, at the end, if there isn't any market for West Elm to sell the same like dolls that you got that year, then they are not going to sell it again.
Yeah. So I put in the chat for people watching the recording, link to a public program we did a few years ago is Growth Good. We were launching a case study initiative in our lab. We wanted to publish also how other people are doing it. And over and over, we've seen that great intentions from a designer, typically working with a small community. They tend to have a sustainable outlet, either a partnership with a luxury store or a particular trade show where they're selling. And where the model breaks is when they feel their own pressure or pressured by an investor to scale and to sell more and we know that this is what leads us to the unsustainability of the world that we're in, this kind of addicted consumption. More is better, increased sales is how corporations report their revenue. And I think to wrap up this part, let's say with Valentina, I would say I think we really need to ask ourselves as consumers, how much convenience are we willing to give up in favor of much more fairness in the world and much more sustainability in terms of planet, but also in terms of social sustainability for the communities who participate in our daily lives as the invisible workers, the invisible labor force that allow for all of our apps to get us to places and deliver us food and all these kinds of things. Would love to turn to Jackie. Wonder, Jackie, if you could share what you were sharing. It sounds like a really exciting initiative, and I think a lot of people here would love to hear more details.
Oh my goodness, but what fabulous questions everybody's been buzzing around with. I mean, I just want to have the whole time talking about all of this. It's been great. There were so many great points that came up about finances and financial education. And another thing I'd just put in the mix for that to be considered is the impact of what happens on a whole community when a few people start to earn a lot. Because obviously the fair trade wages are out of sync with the wages that's going on in the rest of the community on their various jobs. And I've seen myself what has happened when a client wanted to kind of see their fair trade wages handed over directly to the artisans, and okay, that's what they wanted to do. But I found out later on that prices in the marketplace for all those people that had received the higher wages, everybody knew about it. So of course they were charged more because you can afford that. You know, everything is, there are so many threads involved in these elements of fairness. At Motif, what we do is we give a wage that's on a par with what's happening in the local community, so it doesn't rock things out completely, but we create an artisan fund that artisans have access to for other needs and, you know, special celebrations and things like that. But yes, so many other fabulous things about designers' influence. And oh, if anybody wants to loop me into your discussions, please do. It's really exciting to see so many of you really intentional about coming into this space. For myself, you guys are on the cutting edge of research in all of this. And so what I've come up with as a training program, I'll give you a bit of a background too briefly. I know we don't have much time, but I really want to put it through the mill of your research, because you're on the cutting edge of all of this stuff. That is it ethical? Is it appropriate? Is it, you're diving in so many different facets now that have ever been open before. So I'm up for learning just as much. So what it is that I've been living and working in Bangladesh since 1989, primarily with hand weavers. And I have, thankfully, in the last few years, been able to get back to my absolute heart passion of textile design, because it's only in maybe say the last 5 to 8 years or so, people have been concerned about the ethical production of raw materials as well as of the actual finished products. And so getting back to actual textile design has been a very exciting development, because in the period in which I've been in Bangladesh, the handloom industry has plummeted in terms of what's been happening for production of fabrics, mainly because of all the big imports that come into the garment industry from China and elsewhere. One of the many impacts of the demise of the handloom industry, which is mostly rural, is that many of these communities have now become incredibly vulnerable, because particularly the men, and often some women too, have to leave their families and go to cities in order to generate income enough for the families. That leaves the families very vulnerable in these rural areas to human traffickers, primarily because many of them are in the border areas of Bangladesh. Is surrounded on 3 sides by India. Very porous borders, makes for very easy trafficking routes. So one of the things that myself and my partners in Bangladesh that we're really passionate about stabilizing handloom economies in rural Bangladesh is because, as you all know, handloom weaving is not just the person at the loom. The whole process really does take a village. And so when more people can be employed with constant, good salaries, local economies are strengthened, and families are made more secure because there's work for everybody. So with that as my main motivation, coming here to the US, when I moved here and after a number of years started working in my textiles side again. I've gone through a few iterations in working with designers, but I'm now at the point recognizing that if we're going to actually generate sufficient work to really establish security in some of these areas, you know, people have said, oh, Jackie, just make some beautiful fabrics and we'll buy them. One, you might not. Two, how many weavers am I going to employ? Not that many. But if I can equip designers to actually get it, that this most ancient way of sourcing fabric is actually the most ethically responsible and sustainable way of sourcing fabric today, then I think we can actually have a chance at shifting and creating significant impact in the rural areas of, well, certainly I'm starting off with this one village that, you know, obviously I'm working with, but yeah, so the premise of the course is just a 5-week course. They'll learn. I'm basically putting it out there as, if you can draw a stripe, you can design a fabric, because it's woven fabrics. So I'm actually encouraging people to experiment simply with color. So the traditions of hand weaving, obviously they are universal. And so it's kind of bringing together that designer artisan partnership. I kind of have to be in between, mostly for language reasons, but hopefully it'll equip them in other ways too, to properly engage with artisan partnerships when they move on to other things. So that is a very nutshell brush of what it's all about, and I would love any critique, any comment, anything. Thank you.
Thank you. So Valentina and I, with Valentina Frias, co-authored an article that will be published any day now called "No Mas: A Call for Designers to Stop Recolonizing the Artisan Sector." And in that, we broke down the process that designers typically use when working with artisans. And we critiqued each step of the process and suggested more fairer or more just ways forward. So I think that will definitely, reading that and then comparing it to the decisions that you have made in your program, I think would be interesting. Perhaps I'll hold on to the word partnership that you just mentioned. And we often hear that designers and entrepreneurs call their artisans, the artisans that are making the things that they are then selling, they call them partners. But when we look at the business model, the artisans are really workers. They're the labor force. And so I would be most interested to see how you are teaching designers to be truly, what does it mean to be a partner, as opposed to the boss or the middle person who's going to, or the exporter, or the, right? What does that mean? How often, let's say in a bank, there are the partners of the firm, or in a law firm, there are the partners, and then everybody else is not called a partner. They have different kinds of titles. And there's something about partnership that we can, if we really, really focus in on that word, with that word comes all sorts of things, all sorts of who gets to make the decisions, how are we ensuring that the artisan, what I was talking about before, has a similar knowledge, so that they can advocate for what they need. How are they advocating? Is it a cooperative? Do they have the ability to vote on decisions? Do they get to decide? What do they get to decide? do they get to design? These artisans presumably can draw a stripe, and therefore, why do we need designers? Why do we even need to teach designers to work with artisans? Why don't we teach artisans to be designers? And I'd be happy to
As
have
Anna knows that's definitely something I've been involved in as well a lot over the years, is getting artisans much more in tune with what it takes to design themselves for themselves.
Yes.
But
Yes.
in terms of this particular angle going forward to increase sales, is to equip designers really to looking at the facility of creating custom fabrics that for their own particular lines, their own particular sensibilities, their clients, whatever. There's that whole ethos of, traditionally it's called patronization. They, sort of hiring a craftsperson to create the product that you wanted. I mean, that's been happening since the beginning of time. So yeah, that's looking through all of that. I really appreciate that drilling down onto partner, because in a sense, I know that I am as a partner with the people that I'm working with, but the designers that I'm now bringing into the mix, how can I actually equip them to actually own that title of being a partner? So yeah, that's really helpful. Anybody else? Valentina, sorry. Anybody else?
Valentina, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to like just talk too much and like don't give the possibility to others to talk, but it's super interesting. So I do have like 3 quick things to say. So I really like the idea, and like I really like you paying so much attention of like what is the fair price for the artisans, so it doesn't create harm for the whole community. Because I kind of like say quickly on the chat previous when Cynthia was mentioning something about like all the artisans wanted this place to become more touristic, but what actually what are the other problems that like just making a city very very interesting to tourists can bring? So a lot of times like that creates inflations in the regions. And like I know this because like in fact when I went to like a surf town a couple like months ago, all the surfers were saying how it's impossible for them to afford to live in the region because the region became so tourist that like locals can no longer afford it. So what happened with the housing, what happens like with all of that? And I put in the chat like an example of like a community of artisans that was based out of Colombia, but I know this case because I was told that they started working with this famous designer. This famous, like it was an artisan community that a lot of different designers across Colombia and Latin America used to work with. There was a very famous designer that started to work with this community. She offered to pay, or this house offered to pay way more than the rest were paying. So all the artisans started to work and wanting to work just with the famous designer. Then eventually when the designer left the community and was no longer doing any kind of work with them, they didn't have any work. So that's something to consider, and I really appreciate that you are being so thoughtful of like what is the fair price. And in terms of the partnership model, I recently watched a movie of Michael Jordan, and in how the story of like NBA players change in terms of like how did he pick to be promoted by Nike instead of the other ones. So it's just like how can you actually give them a percentage of the products that are sold? So in this case, it was like Nike decided to create a product line based out of like Michael Jordan. They never thought it was going to be as successful as it was. So they decided to give him like a percentage of like what the price of sales was going to be from each shoe that was going to sold. And eventually it became a hit, but that's like that negotiation really pivoted the story of like how NBA players get paid and how can you just like change the role of like partnership in the way that artisans get paid today. So yeah, and the other quick thing that I had to say was in terms of like just eliminating designers, or like how do we generate creative confidence in artisans. There is like this, like the book of like the founders of IDEO, but IDEO is like this firm, and they have like this book called Creative Confidence. And it's just like how there are some people that are like, everyone has creativity, everyone is creative. It's just like some people are more confident in their creative capacity than others. And how do you kind of like expose that creative confidence in artisans so they don't need to rely on anyone else?
Fabulous. Thank you
Awesome.
very, very much. Yeah.
Jackie, I'd love to see more. I'd love to read more. If you want to book time with me, let me know.
Thank you
Would
so
love
much.
to.
Cynthia.
Yeah.
I'll take you up on that for sure.
And I can nudge Valentina if she's available at that time. She can join us.
Yeah, that would be fabulous. I'd really appreciate it.
Awesome. So we're running out of time, but Camila, we didn't get to yours. I was really curious about this what you're exploring, and we have been with my colleague Ibarra Wadud, have been in contact with the 4th generation of quilt makers in Gee's Bend, Alabama, and I've been talking quite a bit about the quilting bee. So the quilting bee is the equivalent of the costurero in the quilting community. And there might be something there which could be interesting to compare just even culturally, and since you're based in the US right now, how the costurero might change. You know, there's also sewing circles, which I think is the same as a costurero, though I was most intrigued by you saying that you were interested in this, the making for gifting and how it correlates to identity. But I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. If people have the time, you can stay on, but I understand if people have to leave.
Yeah, so the thing is that when I interviewed many of them, also because my grandma is part of one of these costureros, they, and this is again the power or the lack of power of domesticity. When you come from this culture where once you're done with work and when you're retired, you're just part of, I mean, you're just a woman who makes things at home. It's like nobody talks about it. So when I started talking to them and asking them what's the power or the feelings they have towards what they do, they were like, yeah, no, it's just to have the time. And after you talk to them more and more, because these conversations with grandmas can take 3 hours because they're grandmas. At the end of those 3 hours, they start telling you how. So one of them told me that this was kind of her reason to live, because she could see her friends. Another one told me how she made a doll for her granddaughter, because they were apart. So she told her granddaughter that once, like whenever she wanted to talk to her, she could talk to a doll, and she would listen to it like from the other part of the world. You know, like those things that are so powerful, but they just kind of neglect or ignore because it's just normal. And I'm very I don't know, like curious about those meanings. But then another thing is that I know from many of them that they would love to be part of the economy again, to kind of restore or get that agency that they lost. But in this conversation was great because it made me feel like it is possible in a way. Like I'm also very critical, and I didn't want to be like, yeah, well, so I can sell your products, because they're not products. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I canceled myself from the like business model of this, that now I know it can be possible if it is very careful. I don't even know from where, but like I'll think about it. I was like, what's more rebellious and and powerful than taking these things that belong to hidden and kind of invisible domesticity to places like museums, you know, like when you go to the MoMA or to the Met, you know that those artifacts, whatever they are, have this power and this history and you know, like they are important. How can you take a doll or like a bunny or something they make because it is also important? But how can you take that to one of the rooms? That was another, I don't know, another possibility. But yeah, I just have many questions in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the crux of the issue is really how do you determine value? And how could you put forward a framework that values invisible labor, domestic labor, women's labor in new and different ways? And it could be the bunny, or it's possible that those artifacts we're seeing in museums were not valuable. They're only valuable because they cease to exist, or because we're romanticizing where they came from,
Yeah.
or because they are the handmade, sustainable made version of things that we have today. In Colombia, there's a beautiful word, oficio, which oficio describes traditionally made products that have a function in our home. And many of the arts and crafts in Colombia now are contemporary adapted versions of things that were made because they had an actual purpose in society, and now they're used as decorative things in the home. So an example of that is in Boyacá, there are these woven, there's like a technique, they make woven placemats, but they used to weave little baskets. The role of the basket was to hold the coins when we were engaged in a transaction and I was purchasing something from you, and we were, you know, to weigh the currency, right? To figure out what I'm paying. And it used to be for that purpose. Now we don't use it for that purpose. We use it again as decoration or as a placemat. Or so there's also the evolution of crafts that had purpose that now loses its purpose because it becomes decorative. And for some people, they put a lot of, I guess there's great value sometimes in the decorative. So that would also be interesting to explore. But yeah, really, really great. I'm also reminded of the work of Sarah Corbett, I think. She wrote a book called Craftivism, The Art of Gentle Protest. And craftivism is activism through craft. So imagine the difference between people walking with signs and yelling in front of the Supreme Court when they're about to overturn Roe versus Wade. That's how we typically protest, or we see activists, right, politically. Craftivism encourages us to, instead of the picket signs and the kind of the yelling, what if we did a huge sewing circle of thousands of people in front of the Supreme Court who are together maybe sewing imagery or signage about the same thing that the others are protesting, but the making in public is a conversation starter in the way that picketing with signs sometimes is not for people on the other side. So there could also be something there that you could explore around conversation. Is it about the making, or is it about the conversation? Is it about the craft, or is it about the community that is built? Exactly. And where are we really putting value? And how do we create frameworks to think about capital that is not only based on commerce, but capital that is based on these larger societal goals?
Yeah, one of my, like the biggest question was, what are they really knitting? Because and again, we have many sources in Spanish, but what are you, ¿qué están tejiendo? You know, it's
Mhm.
not the same in English. And I struggled trying to find a word in English for oficio. Because many things, and that makes you understand how different cultures understand things differently, you know, like there's not a word for oficio. But also in about the conversation and about the value of things, I just found this museum in Denmark, and I'm applying for the Parsons student, for the fund, for the travel fund.
Oh, the travel fund, great.
Because I found this museum. They do in Denmark the parallel to a costurero. It's like one of the parallels, I guess, is a meeting that women do around papierkunst, which is like doing this craft on paper where they cut very very thin figures, and they do it like with women and with circles. And that's disappearing, and that's now for only like old women, and that's it. That's now dying. But there's this museum where they are trying to make a new strategy, and it's called the Museum for Papierkunst, where they bridge these grandmas and these old people with kids and teenagers. So they encourage them to go to these places and learn with them. So it's not about buying the craft, because those crafts are not like for sale. Like they don't find a value in that. So it's more about, I don't know, like making that conversation alive again. So I would love to explore that as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I look forward to learning more as you advance in your explorations, and feel free to be in touch. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a jam-packed hora today. Hora in 15 minutes. Thank you for being here. Look forward to seeing you next month.